Chapter 6, What Bakugo Wants, Number 1. Of all the places Ochako expects to wind up in her time at UA, straddling Bakugo isn't high in the rankings, or on the rankings at all, so in addition to the usual nausea caused by her impromptu trip to a zero-gravity Wurlitzer, it's reasonable that Ochako's a little surprised by the situation at hand. Well, at legs. Ochako's predominant thought is that she really doesn't want to throw up on Bakugo, a goal they can both get behind whether Bakugo knows it or not. So all Ochako does for a moment is stay right where she is, taking deep, rhythmic breaths as she wills away the wall of her quirk. It's a shame that "I need a minute" is all she manages in explanation of this fact. "Does it have to be on top of me?" Bakugo crackles with the same ill-tempered impatience, but if he really wanted to move Ochako, she's certain he would. That he remains flat on his back, palms facing the sky and attention drawn into a focus on Ochako, means he's not so violently opposed to this situation that he means to change it just yet. As soon as the solidified thought takes form, that Bakugo is on some level okay with Ochako sitting on him, she thinks it would be a really fantastically smart idea to stop doing it right away. Riding a trigger doesn't mean it's going to start purring, and Ochako's already pushing her luck with how long she's been able to gather her wits while settled comfortably on Bakugo's hips, the shape of which she can feel as her recently returned weight presses down over him. "Sorry." Ochako's stomach gives a lurch, and she leans forward a little. For balance, her hands come to rest on the most practical support available, which is the bedrock of Bakugo's chest. She takes another deep breath and says, "I'll get off now." "Context, Ochako," she thinks helplessly to herself as she leans harder against Bakugo, forcing enough strength into her jelly arms to lift herself up. It's really difficult not to notice the way Bakugo's staring at her. As if they're meeting for the first time, but he's been studying her picture for years. It's a terrible joke that what Bakugo comes out with next is a famously blunt, "What's wrong with you?" The fewest words required to pinpoint the most important thing to him at the moment, because Bakugo's concern, what he threw himself under her like a crash pad for, is Ochako's welfare. For the sake of their continued training, of course. He is probably annoyed that she doesn't seem perfectly chipper and ready to do it all over again. "Nothing." Ochako pushes harder against Bakugo's chest, most assuredly firm, with a practical, juicy amount of give, and lifts a knee, swiveling until she finally comes to a new resting place that's not on top of anyone. Splaying out on the ground next to Bakugo, Ochako sucks in a new round of steadying breaths. "You sound like you're trying to take a shit," Bakugo says unkindly as he sits up. And there's even a little arrogance as he strips Ochako down for daring to play tough. "Yeah, you're obviously fine." It's too static to be a question. And if Ochako wasn't super busy not barfing on Bakugo out of sensibility right now, she would absolutely do it out of spite. "It's just my quirk," Ochako admits as her stomach starts to settle. "I get enough nausea from lifting myself without all that." As much as Ochako values this training, she's not keen on trying that move again anytime soon. About that, there's an inflection that makes Ochako wonder if she's not the only one feeling a touch of awkwardness from time to time, but Bakugo's sights soon key back in on their objective with ruthless efficiency. "I have an idea." "Okay?" More than anything, Ochako hopes the next thing Bakugo says isn't along the lines of, "I want to do that again." Bakugo, of course, can never let Ochako off that easy. "Let's do it again, but this time without landing." "Without landing?" she echoes. "But we were totally out of control." "That was the first time," Bakugo says with utter confidence. "I know what to expect now." Ochako doesn't even know how Bakugo managed to stay oriented enough the first time to get them both on the ground in the order of his choosing. And again, he's spent far more time in the air than Ochako, and perhaps expects her to keep up, or at very least put up. Bakugo's plan unfurls in front of Ochako like some rare blooming flower, fragranced with a heady mix of recently burned chemicals. She knows what he'd prefer she do with it, but what Bakugo gets is Ochako's hand resting in his own, dead weight, hanging on a slack arm. "What do you have in mind?" she asks with a poor attempt at concealing her trepidation as he drags her onto her feet, like pulling up a root. There's something other than annoyance in Bakugo's face for a moment, fiery gaze drawing in to focus on Ochako when she draws level with him. He expects to be trusted. What choice does that leave her with? "We'll stick to straight lines. Keep it simple," Bakugo says without even needing a prompt. "At first." Ochako nods like she knows what that means. She doesn't, and somehow hasn't yet drawn back her hand from the bowl of Bakugo's plan. "What do you want me to do?" It comes out like so many things Ochako says around Bakugo in these sessions. A little strange. That lingering thought of what it sounds like niggles at Ochako, an itch she can't quite reach as Bakugo's grip slips out of hers. "It's easier to show you." Mere seconds after breaking the contact between them, Bakugo demands it again, palm flat in front of her, like about to take her hand and make a vow. "Give me a tap so I can get some height." A gesture that leads with a jerk of Bakugo's chin indicates a large storage facility-type building that he hasn't yet managed to destroy yet. "Then what?" Ochako prompts, still entirely unsure what Bakugo plans to do. "Just do it!" Bakugo growls a little, as if he senses Ochako's disapproval of its little matter to him. "I can't explain if you're pissing around asking questions." Feeling herself on the brink of an exercise in faith, Ochako lets her fingertips rest again on Bakugo's palm and activates her quirk, taking a step or two back in anticipation of his launching himself several stories into the air and catching the ledge of his intended building as he sails by. Had Bakugo missed, he'd probably be flying into orbit right now, but after barely 2 sessions, he's becoming more and more confident moving around while weightless. Only Bakugo hits the learning curve with such force it's like they have a lifelong vendetta. Or perhaps just him and Deku. "Move a bit closer, then release me." Bakugo's voice echoes with the height and distance, but only Ochako can hear him well enough. Thank goodness only she can hear him. And starts walking towards the foot of the building, head tipped back to watch the distinctively top-heavy figure he cuts. "Release!" Bakugo sits on the edge of the building, legs hanging over the 3-story minimum drop like he's never known fear in his life, letting Ochako look up at the bottom of his feet and ask, "Now what?" "I'm gonna jump," Bakugo replies with such calm that for a moment Ochako treats it as normal too. Then she actually hears what he said, and her mouth hangs so far open she might catch flies in it. "You're gonna do what?" Ochako throws up her hands in alarm. "Not yet," Bakugo barks, which is partly necessary from his height, but also his own short temper burning away that non-existent fuse. "You have to get in the air and catch me on the way down, but don't release your quirk until later." Ochako's disoriented by such clear instructions, albeit not entirely perfect ones. "How much later?" "You'll know." "What's going to happen?" Ochako calls up at the bottom of Bakugo's feet. Bakugo responds with an utterly cocky, "Just fucking do it and you'll see, won't you?" His feet swing out of view and he gets up onto the ledge in a way that makes Ochako's disturbed stomach even more unsettled, a feat she'd hardly thought possible until Bakugo, without further warning, drops off the edge. Objectively, Ochako knows why Bakugo does it. Practical learning can convey in 30 seconds what 30 minutes of talking might achieve. In the heat of the moment, though, Ochako's pretty panicked to find Bakugo taking short walks off buildings without warning, especially when he takes a dive so he's coming down on her head first. Ochako lifts herself off the ground, wrestling a new wave of sickness on top of her existing nausea. knowing that if nothing else, she ought to stop Bakugo from face-planting on the concrete with this headstrong idea. At least he's coming at her slower this time, dropping only under the effects of gravity without the rocket boost of his quirk. Raising her hands with her eyes turned upward, Ochako forms a sketchy idea of what she thinks might happen when Bakugo reaches her. There's a moment when it's almost like they're going to miss each other. Then the theory all gets put into practice when Bakugo's hands close in a recognizably assured grip on Ochako's wrists. The spinning starts well before Ochako returns the hold around Bakugo's wrist and activates her quirk, but she gets that part down on instinct more than anything else. Bakugo swings around Ochako like a pinwheel, except this time it's a little slower and not quite so violently disorienting. The things Bakugo is saying about straight lines sort of start making sense as they whirl on only one axis rather than several. Then about as suddenly as it all happens, Bakugo lets go of Ochako. Panic overtakes her for a scary moment as she flies through the air like coming off a roundabout, but she's halfway to releasing her quirk before her feet hit the ground and she figures it all out. Ochako's on the ground, while Bakugo is heading up in the direction he came, at about a speed of a child's accidentally released balloon. They're close enough to speak, but a nod from Bakugo is all Ochako needs to release her quirk. Release! Bakugo starts falling more or less on top of Ochako's head, and on some level she's ready to use her quirk if she has to, but she feels quite sick enough already and is expecting self-reliance from Bakugo. Halfway down to the ground, Bakugo delivers. Explosions spark from his palms and he changes course, flipping over to cut a new path through the air, spinning more than once on the way down and landing with a thump a few meters away. His back is to her, so the turn of Bakugo's head over his shoulder cuts him out in profile, one red eye on Ochako as he asks, "You get it now?" "Uh-huh." Ochako bobs her head in emphasis, still queasy but managing to keep her breakfast where she put it earlier this morning. Good. The moment of glory Ochako has to bask in hearing such an affirmation from Bakugo of all people is short-lived because the next thing out of his mouth is, "Now let's do it for real." For real? Ochako tries not to gape and fails in the attempt. Then what was this? "So you'd understand what happens next," Bakugo states with enough of an air of impatience to stand the hair on the back of Ochako's neck on end. It's a strange mix of realizing that Bakugo is actually being cooperative and that this is genuinely his idea of it. He's come a long way from his early days at UA, but he's still Bakugo. That's just something Ochako has to live with. "So," Ochako says with a conscious air of positivity, hoping that Bakugo's mood might budge to match it even a little. "What happens next?" "We do it bigger." Bakugo powers through the course he seems to have so clearly charted in his mind, and while Ochako gets it roughly, she doesn't totally get it. Perhaps she doesn't have to, just needing to believe in Bakugo's nose for this stuff and trusting he shows better than he tells. "It's gotta pack a punch." "I bet it will." Ochako is trying not to worry about how much more of this her quirk and stomach contents can take, but she doesn't want to let Bakugo down. "But talk to me through it first, okay? I can't see inside your head." Bakugo gives Ochako another one of those weirdo looks, but coming from him, it's hardly a balanced source. He just sighs and starts rolling his shoulders, muscles bulging all the way up, an iron cable neck that Ochako is confused to be finding herself in consideration of, like whether Bakugo's tension would measure up to Kirishima's hardening. Ochako would have to get her hands on it to be sure, but reckons it's a close call. "I'm gonna get some distance, blast off with the first move, and come back down on you harder and faster than before." Even knowing this is Bakugo's earnest attempt of an explanation, Ochako can't help but wonder if he has any idea what some of the things he's saying sound like out of context. "You're going to catch me up in the air and spin out just like we did here." An arrogant smirk starts working its way onto Bakugo's face. "If you're still on your feet after that, catch me." Ochako wonders when her role in this thing went from being a grounded quirk supplier to some kind of zero-gravity yo-yo, but each step has been logical in its own way. Somehow she understands the components well enough that when Bakugo describes it, she can picture what he's going for. A high-speed direction change in midair, and even wilder yet, Ochako believes they can pull it off. All right. She's determined to make this crazy thing with Bakugo work, even if it means hurling. I'm ready. End of chapter 6. Hello, my lovelies. Penny here. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's a creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast, all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.